All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. This is great. Great to meet you. This is how we meet each other nowadays, of course.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you're passionate about.
Oh, yes. All right. So I'm Tessa Finlev with Dolby Laboratories, and I am our internal Foresight strategist, which is very fun. I'm the first internal role that's just dedicated to helping us research the future and understand how
I
the
love it.
emerging
This is
future may
great.
impact us. Yeah. And so that is also coincidentally what I'm passionate about.
Nice.
Yes.
Well,
Understanding.
it's great when those Venn circles overlap, right?
Yes, it's very exciting when that does happen. So that's, a big piece of that is understanding how to take the art of long-term thinking and foresight and making it useful inside a company, which is not a straightforward path.
Oh, that's an incredible challenge, and I'd love to hear how you did it. I mean, were you always in strategic foresight, or did you move from something else?
Well, I came from Institute for the Future.
Oh, nice.
Joining Dolby, and I was with them for like over a decade, more or less. So I really grew up.
I thought nobody ever left the Institute for the Future. That place is so cool.
It is a challenging place to leave, yes, because it is such an interesting, exciting place to be. Yeah, but I grew up in IFTF, and that's where I cut my teeth in the futures world, so to speak. And so, yeah, joining Dolby is an opportunity to take it full circle and understand how to apply it internally.
What do you find? So I'm assuming that you're finding it a challenge to present the further future out stuff that we were doing at the IFTF to your management internally, to your leadership.
Yeah, it's it depends on who you talk to, which is also to be expected. In many ways, Dolby is on the leading edge of a lot of technology, and there's creation of a lot of patents and deep scientific research and knowledge that happens within Dolby, and the creation of new technologies that help shape the future of sound and sight. At the same time, there are different kinds of business structures and customers and those needs, which tend to be much more nearsighted. So some of it is bridging that gap. And yes, for the people who are more focused on keeping the lights on and running the business and making sure that everything is healthy in that way, it's harder to have the longer term conversation. Yeah, but part of the work then is in bringing more people across the company, across hierarchies into this conversation, so that it becomes more strongly embedded.
Excellent. So I'm curious to know how you instantiate the strategic foresight practice within Dolby, because I mean, I'm familiar with the IFTF and how they operate, and there was always that interesting gap between where the IFTF sits and where businesses might want it to sit, or what to help to guide it to. And I'm assuming that you have that sort of thing happening there. So how do you instantiate strategic foresight within an organization?
Yes, that's a
$64,000 question, right?
I haven't solved it just yet. So
we're all still working on it.
Yeah. If anybody's figured that out, reach out to me. Yeah, it is a really different beast being in a futures research group or in a consulting role than being in-house. It doesn't make sense to spend all your time and money on doing long-term, well-polished, really well-designed research,
right,
when you're in-house. It's more about what are the quicker high-touch, or the not high-touch, what are the quicker ways to help people have the insights or to help expand their thinking. And so then you also have to think carefully about who you're partnering with and how, because people have their day jobs. Outside of me, there are limited people who have the actual bandwidth and time to do futures research. And there are people inside Dolby who do it in different ways. That's not to say it doesn't happen. It happens quite a bit. But depending on who I'm partnering with, you know, they might not have time to go out and do scanning and the research and to really understand the methodology and to come to their own insights. And at the same time, if I just come and I present on the future of entertainment or out-of-home entertainment or something, it's probably not going to resonate. So it's a real battle in terms of figuring out, that dynamic of helping people along the way to build their own perspective, but also creating as fast as an entry into getting there.
Mm-hmm. So are you finding that you're doing more of your own sort of futuring, I guess you could call it, or are you turning around and actually trying to expand other people's timeframes, like having them try to think out further out?
Yeah. So I've been at Dolby for about 2 years, and it's been a process of throwing spaghetti on the wall and seeing what's good. It's been great. I've been very fortunate. I've had the kind of free range to make experiments and float around the company and understand where there's energy and alignment. And
a dream job, I might add.
Yeah, it's not too shabby. Not too shabby at all. And the other interesting thing is I sit within the people team, which is very unusual. But it creates a certain sense of ease in moving about the company, because I don't have any business objectives or territorial instincts around where innovation happens. Mm-hmm. And I just want to help us think more strategically about the future and about how the innovation happens related to that. It doesn't matter where it comes from. And so that's been an interesting thing. But to your question, I think, so when I first joined, yes, part of the effort was I need to do my own featuring and build the case for it and have some really helpful products, if you will, to show what it is that this is all about. And then partner with different groups to help them do their own research and tie it to whatever they're working on. And then as I've gone further down the road, it's becoming clear that the best way in, which was probably obvious from the get-go, but the best way in is to create some cross-cutting structure throughout the company so that we have an internal cohort of people who are tasked with doing this work. And then I'm sort of a facilitative glue that can also add my own filter on top of it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's definitely the way to do it, because there are people within the organization who I'm sure are more future focused, and you just need to sort of drag them out and say, hey, now part of your gig is this, and they probably love it because they may not have had the time or the effort or the group to work with to be able to do that sort of thing. So you're like you say, the glue that sort of glues everything together.
Yes. And then also trying to expand that circle, because as you're saying, there are those people who already have that long-term orientation and they're thinking about the cutting edge and they're doing the research. And those are the same people who are typically called on by our executives when there's a question about some new technology or some new trend. And so part of the work is also expanding our inner circle and expanding our perspective so that we're not stuck with, falling into the same blind spots because we're relying on the same group of people.
Right. So did you have a specific leader within the organization who said, hey, we need to do strategic foresight? Or how did you get into that role, I guess? How did they create the role for you?
Yeah. The Linda Rogers, who's the head of HR, she has done a lot of futures work in her career in various companies. She worked with IFCF a long time ago. And so she was the person who brought me in and saw that there was a space for it. And that's also why I sit in the people team.
Interesting. I mean, I've never thought of the HR group as the one to hold this function, but it actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Because especially when you were talking about sort of being more free range and not being attached to a specific business or anything like that. And if you think about it, I mean, it's a motivating force too, right?
Yes. And so many times these conversations, they come back to questions around internal culture and identity. And it's also, a lot of it comes back to talent and ensuring and making sure that we're able to feed the right talent into the businesses. So the people team also need to be on top of what's happening in the external world and the business strategy and all of those things, so that they can effectively help the business lead into that future and have the right kind of talent and the right thinking around it. And there's a lot of space for the people team to partner with the businesses in a very strategic way, so that they are helping them shape their team and their talent and the structure of that, so that they can effectively build whatever they're trying to build. So there are a lot of really interesting ways in which it actually does make sense for this work to sit in the people team, rather than it just being a happy coincidence. I think I would probably, moving forward, I would probably want to design it this way.
Yeah. Well, what else, unless there's a sort of dedicated R&D, but even there, it doesn't really fit right?
Well, I mean, that's where a lot of the futures work already happens, is within the R&D space.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where.
But the IFTF style futurist stuff doesn't really happen in technology, right? I mean, it's more cultural,
right?
Social.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And so a lot of the R&D stuff, it's very technical, and then it's also very long term. They're trying to, they're building something that doesn't exist. That's what we talk about in the futures world, but we're like fast futures, keeping the ball going, keeping, our senses of what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of where it intersects with people, right? Because if you think about it, that piece, that's where it intersects with technology. But, this stuff is intersected with people, and how this stuff all affects the way it affects people. And so it sounds like a perfect fit to put it in HR. Yes. I mean, that's.
Yeah. And of course, the future of work and how we get things done, that's a critical component of any company. And at Dolby, there's a really strong orientation in the people team to be proactively understanding the future of work and experimenting with different technologies as a tool for work. So that's there's also some good alignment there. They don't need my help within the people team.
Right. That's great. So sometimes when you bring some of the futurist resources and tools into organizations, they might look at it and go, wow, that is so far out. It's not really relevant. I mean, have you come across that? And then if so, how have you made it more relevant?
Yeah, it's the thing about listening to your clients and understanding the level of provocation they're comfortable with, and just being respectful about that. So it does require putting some of my personal things on the back burner and being more focused in on where there's a need and alignment. But continuously trying to push the thinking a little bit further along. Though oftentimes I think that there's a big gap between, and this is the ongoing thing, like when you're researching emerging futures and you're looking at like the third horizon, businesses is typically run by what's happening on the first, maybe a little bit of the second. And so connecting those dots, that's an ongoing challenge. Absolutely. But I think part of it is associated with bringing more people into this kind of mindset and way of thinking. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is also tied to the external perspective and making sure what you're thinking about has a connection to the external world and what is happening in the external world.
Right. But a lot of stuff that you're talking about doesn't even exist in the external world, right? Or, I mean, obviously you're bringing in signals and other things like that, but there are some things that you're creating that they don't exist anywhere, and nobody looks at it and goes, wow, that's too far-fetched. I don't even want to think about that.
Yeah, well, that happens within the R&D team, absolutely. Where I don't even have to come in for that to happen. I mean, there's generally a challenge, I think, in any organization where the people who are tasked with building the new things and innovating, if you're building something that doesn't, it doesn't quite exist yet, that means there's no readily available market. And so then when you're transitioning the conversation over to product managers, they're like, well, what do our customers say? They don't want this.
Yeah, who am I going to sell this to?
Exactly. So bridging that gap and creating the right resources and infrastructure for the people who are doing that level of R&D so that they can test their way up towards understanding a potential marketplace is part of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then that allows you have to sort of step back from strategic foresight there and do something a little more practical, right?
Yes. So a lot of, and a lot of this stuff is not, it's a blurring of strategic foresight or futures research and strategy and innovation, and then people dynamics and understanding org structures and everything. So all of those things they have to come together. So when you're in-house doing strategic foresight, the futures piece of it is just, it's one piece of it. And then it has to fold into strategy and all those other pieces.
Right. So in the tools that you use to sort of present what you're doing, have you found anything that's specifically effective and more, and I don't know, speaks to the corporate mindset more than anything else? Like if you look at all the wide swath of tools that, Futurism gives you, is there anything that works better?
This is maybe going to sound awful, but tools don't really work.
They don't? Wow.
Templates, worksheets, tools, they're good if you're facilitating a workshop. And you're getting your hands dirty. But otherwise, I think the primary thing is storytelling and just having a really clear, crisp articulation for whatever future it is that you're talking about. I mean, obviously, their signals, they always resonate, and having some common language is important to help everybody get on the same page and understand what we're talking about. But again, it kind of goes back to this thing of everybody has their day job. They don't have time to sit down and do like some scenario building process or even to make sense of some new framework necessarily. Right. So the best tool is just being able to connect the dots and to talk about it really clearly in a way that connects the dots back to the business.
So the storytelling piece is the most important. Like if you can really paint the picture of the future that you're trying to create, then that sort of triggers all sorts of other ideas and neurons into that space. And you don't really need any of these other things like news from the future or anything like that.
No, I don't think so. And it's also, telling the story in a way that connects it back to the business, which is, as you're saying, articulating, well, what does this future that we're building actually look like? And what does that mean for us? That's the best tool, if you can do that. Right. Yeah. And the more people inside who can do that, the better it is.
Have you found that backcasting is important? Does that resonate?
I haven't done any like official structured backcasting, but the okay, well, so there's the backcasting, the traditional backcasting where you're saying here's the scenario and then let's go forward into it. Yeah, right. That structure, that framework makes a lot of sense, and that is it's a flip in the way most people think inside a company, right? Most people they're doing the traditional way of from today into the future, and so just saying, okay, we're first in the future and then we're going to build our way from today into the future resonates, and it makes a lot of sense. So that's definitely that would be, if from the lens of tools, that would be a good tool that resonates with people.
Yeah, that's always worked for me, because it's basically like taking the maze backwards. Everybody understands that when they were kids, they were trying to go through a maze.
Yes. Yeah.
It's much easier to go backwards. But then, of course, then you don't know if this future that you're coming from is necessarily the future that you're going to be going to. But hey, at least it's something in the right direction.
Yes, at least it's cool. Something that's there. Yeah. And there's a lot of interest in putting more structure and rigor into how we are thinking about the future, and ensuring that it isn't just like a happy random dance, but it's something that has been methodically thought through and understood.
Right. So have you had some feedback on how effective? See, I'm trying to think about how can we pitch other companies that this is something you guys need. You need a strategic foresight person or group or initiative within your organization. I mean, what kind of feedback have you had for your work, which says, this is great. I love that she's here and she's doing some awesome work, and this is what we're getting out of it. Have you got anything like that?
Yeah, the feedback that I've gotten has been very positive. And there's a lot of and some of the focus is, and there's a duality, right? If futures thinking, strategic foresight is interesting because it can be everything.
Yeah.
In many respects, right? So it's like,
it's a nice big umbrella.
Yeah, let me tell you the 1,000 ways, the 1,000 reasons and ways in which we need futures thinking. And you're gonna, like, by the end of it, have no idea what's going on. But so within the context of futures thinking can be more or less anything. And that means my job is just to also float around the company and find interesting things to do. One of the things that people have really appreciated, which should be, I think, part and parcel with anybody doing this stuff in-house or not, is the external perspective. Is coming at any question, any problem, any topic from the external world. I'm not coming at it from our financials. I'm not coming at it even from our strategy or roadmaps. I'm coming at it from what's happening in the external world. And that's really critical information. And that's been something that people very much appreciate, having that within their projects. And then it's also, since I've been with Dolby, it's been a process of building social capital and meeting people and getting their interest and engagement. And I haven't met a single person yet who has been, maybe they're doing it behind my back, but I haven't met a single person yet who's like, I don't know why this is happening. Everybody's like, I'm so excited this is happening. I'm so thrilled that we're putting more focus on this. This is a really important thing for us to understand and to do. And so those are great. Those are all really great signals that there's obviously an organizational need for more structured long-term thinking.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I mean, if you think about what you're doing, no one else is doing it. I mean, is anybody within the organization doing what you're doing, or was doing what you're doing, or in this traditional structure? No one really is.
There are groups that do trend scanning and they do trend scanning. It's a little more near term than what we might bring to the table, and it's more siloed in their individual groups.
Yep.
And a little more ad hoc. So the goal now is to create the cross-cutting structure that goes across the company, which would allow us to break out of the silos and have more of that connective conversation, and have it on a more cyclical, ongoing basis. And there's so many complex things that go into running a company like Dolby, and having all the different groups talk together and understand where are we going is a very difficult thing to do. And so part of it is just having that facilitative connective tissue, which in a traditional org structure, it's questionable about where that function sits, where that role sits. And so that is part of it. And that all ties back to the futures thinking principle, I guess, that no one person is an expert in the future. And so it doesn't make sense for any one person to be sitting around saying, this is the future that we're all heading towards, and I can perfectly align, and here's what we're doing, everybody fall in line. It needs to be more of this collective process that is kind of like a middle out process. You're talking to people up and down the hierarchies, and they're passing it back and forth to each other. And hopefully that can create some sort of more organic, shared understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Because some people might argue, well, that's what we have strategy folks for. That's what we have R&D folks for. And that's what we have a CEO for. But they don't look that far out. I mean, you'd think that they would. I mean, isn't that part of what leadership is supposed to be doing? But it seems to me that they're not really structured to think that far out.
No, and you can't blame anybody in those positions, because I
Right.
would not want to train my job for our CEO or corporate strategy people. It's a lot of stressful stuff. You have to keep track of so many things and so many details. And so, it shouldn't be their job necessarily either to have, of course, to have that mindset and to have the awareness and the ability to make sense of it, so that when they are presented with some forecasts or scenarios or future trends, they can understand what it means and how to make sense of it. But they don't need to be out there doing the kind of putting it all together and thinking through the framework and understanding, well, where's the future going and where's our place in it? They need to have the strong kind of support structures in place to help that happen.
Oh yeah, because it's extremely complicated. It's amazing how I think so many people try to simplify the world and the future and just try to come up with sort of tenets and say, well, this is where we're going to go. But it's way more complicated than that. It's the real world.
Yes, it's the real world. Yes. And businesses are so complicated too. So when you're marrying the external world and the internal world, the level of complication just explodes.
Right.
Because there's no, you can't argue against the fact that there's a business group who's trying to say, well, how do we get more customers on this product that we have? Yes, we do need to do that. Yes.
Okay, so do you think that what you're doing is sort of transmutable? I mean, other companies should basically be doing the exact same thing because they don't have a strategic foresight person or group. And I mean, and like you were saying earlier, that you hear all the good things that are coming out of it. But I mean, what else do you think would be a benefit?
Yeah, I think it is transmutable. And another reason why I think it's an interesting function within the people team is so much of it is there's a strong connection to employee engagement. And when you have people who are working in any organization, they have passion for the organization. They should, at least, right? They have interest, they have ideas. And there's always that question of how do we tap that energy? How do we engage people? And having internal foresight work is one way of doing that. It's not I don't want to have the list of like, these are 1,000 things that future thinking can solve. But it is that's a big.
But we can solve 1,000 things. That's the beauty of it.
There's a big piece of employee engagement in this. And so when I've been going around the company talking to people about setting up internal futures program, I met with so much enthusiasm. And this is from people who are, high up in their career and on the executive chain, and people who are early on as well. And that sense of, yes, let's get together and actually have these complex conversations about, well, what does blockchain mean for our company? What does, let's actually parse through and dig into metaverse and what it means, and network coding and all of these like crazy things that are happening that we have our various fingers in. Let's have the structure to actually dig into it and think through it and understand it together. People are so inspired and interested in engaging in that process. Then the trick is, of course, what do you do with all that energy?
Right.
And how do you then enable people to experiment with the ideas that they have and have input into, have an ear into the executive leadership? So that's the other kind of big piece of this, is gathering the right people and aligning the right audience and stakeholders and having the right social capital is a big thing. So it takes time to understand a company culture and get to know people, and then be positioned so that you can help connect those dots.
So that actually leads me to the next question is, so your outputs. So what do you do with your outputs?
Well, so there's a whole kind of dissemination plan around, let's get this in front of all the critical audiences. and then be basically informants on what's happening in the world and how it relates to Dolby. And then being very diligent about connecting with having different kinds of roles. So one role are the internal futurists, the people who are helping us think through what's happening in the world. And then there's another role of people who are the internal strategists, who are tasked with saying, well, how does this connect to our business? Where is the relevance?
Excellent.
And then that comes together into like a comprehensive perspective. And then there's a whole nother level of, now let's disseminate and let's connect it to the right places within the company, whether it's at the executive leadership level, with strategy, with R&D, with product managers, and making sure we hit all the relevant audiences. And then there's another layer.
Okay.
It can just keep getting more and more complicated.
Just keep adding.
There's another layer of creating a way for people everyone in the company, to vote and put their 2 cents on like the forecasts that are coming out, the concepts that are coming out of the cohort, so that we don't get stuck in our own blind spot and say, look, here are 20 of us and we think that this forecast is really important and interesting for Dolby. Well, why don't we actually put it out to the whole company and let people vote on it? And then we can see, oh yeah, the whole company thinks this is potentially very disruptive. It's not just those of us who are drinking our own Kool-Aid.
Right.
And so then that can also be kind of compiled into our shared understanding of not just the potential futures, but the potential impact to Dolby.
Very cool. And has any of that ever sort of trickled down back into product management, and something's been created out of it yet?
Well, we're kind of in the getting going phase. So let's link back and I can let you know how long do we need to give me for that to happen. But we do have some product managers who are part of the internal features group.
Very cool. So if something were to pop out, then you're ready to act on it, or somebody's ready to act on it if they need to.
But that is the biggest trick, right? Is connecting it back to product managers. And yeah, we'll see.
Well, you just backcast again. You say, well, what's the great grandparent of this thing, right? Let's start with that today, and then we'll eventually get to where we're going.
Yeah. Well, and then, is having the connection to product management and products the holy grail? It might be, but I'm not sure. The holy grail could also be having a really clear story and vision for the future that we're building, so that everybody can plug in whichever way it makes sense.
No, I love that, because I'm spending too much time in the world of what's the ROI. So if we can get value without having to concern ourselves with ROI, then that's great. I love it.
I'm going to protect myself from ROI as much as possible. Just wall myself off.
A wall against ROI. I love it. So typically this is our Think Like a Futurist segment, but I'm not sure we've been talking like futurists the whole time. So, I mean, do you have any thoughts about where things are going to be going like 10 years in the future?
This is the question I always ask people, and then it's always when it comes back to me, I'm like, where is it going? The things that I'm very interested in right now, I'm very interested in DAOs and understanding the organizational potential of
those are
DAOs.
incredibly interesting. I don't know if I understand them 100%, but they are very, very interesting.
Yeah, I don't understand them 100% either, but they're very interesting. And I'm on Reddit, and I follow various subreddits just to kind of keep up on things. And someone posted on a subreddit for Ethereum recently a question around how do I actually get a say in whichever DAO I'm participating in. I keep trying to grab projects, but I'm on a different time zone, and so I miss out on all the good ones. And I responded just to say, I want to know the answer to this too, but I don't think there's been a response to that question. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of, that's an interesting space that I'm trying to follow and learn more about. And network coding, which is kind of a new thing for me, but the ability to make the best use of our bandwidth is interesting. There's so much energy consumption in everything that we do. And there's a ton of energy consumption in machine learning. And as IFTF said and as IFTF said many years ago, everything is media, and now literally everything is media. And understanding how to make the best use of the bandwidth that we use the lowest bandwidth for the highest quality of service, I think is a really interesting potential future to ensure that we can maintain the energy consumption that this whole world will require. I mean, if we if we continue the evolution towards the metaverse, it's just gonna keep going.
I don't know about that term. I'm like, okay, this is like hoverboard to me, right? Hoverboard, it's not a hoverboard, but they're calling it a hoverboard. It's not a metaverse, but they're calling it a metaverse.
Could we call it cyberspace? Just an extension and a natural evolution of cyberspace?
Everything comes back. Cyberspace. I love cyberspace.
What would you call metaverse?
Well, it just, metaverse is like a metaverse. I'm thinking of it from the physics perspective, like it's another universe, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what's your definition of metaverse? It's like just a mashup of all real world and.
Yeah, I haven't watched all of Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse reveal, but I've heard a clip or two of it, and I'm sad because he's articulating something that seems like he's doing a good job of telling the story of what everybody's trying to talk about. And by doing that, he is positioning himself as Facebook as the leaders, whether or not they're actually building some, no one entity can build it, as I think he's even been saying. So yeah, I guess it's a fully encompassing virtual world, which is an extension of the internet as we know it. It's just moving into a 3D space.
It's a virtual internet.
Yeah, it's a virtual internet.
I don't know. It's a virtual reality across the internet. I don't know. Is it an all-inclusive surrounding virtual reality? It's basically just virtual reality. It's just a larger virtual reality, isn't it? Or an
virtual reality plus augmented reality.
Yeah.
And then
whatever they had in Ready Player One, that thing. That was the meta.
And then, of course, all of the data and commerce and all of the other things that go into that.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if I agree with that term, but it's good. So this has been great. Thank you so much. So what's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they want to?
Oh, just find me on LinkedIn, the coolest place on the internet.
I love it. And we got to do this again, because I definitely want to pick your brains more on like bringing Foresight into the corporate world, because it desperately needs it. Yes.
Yeah. Let's definitely circle back once we've roll the ball a little bit further. I
love it. Sounds great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.